Working Drummer.
Now kick it.
This is the Working Drummer Podcast, serving up perspectives, experiences, and stories from ground-level working pros. Advice, tips, and secrets on how to build a career in the music business.
The complete motion is the key to getting a nice groove. With the drum set, we only hear half of the motion, whereas if you play the shaker or a tambourine, you hear both sides of the motion. The entire motion is critical in order to get the right feel and to get the timing right. That, ladies and gentlemen, was Steve Smith. And I'm happy to say that he is my guest today on the podcast Working Drummer. I'm your host, Matthew Crouse. Steve is a legend, and he does not need much introduction. You might know him from his years with Journey. You might know him as a band leader with Vital Information. You might know him from his videos, instructional books. You might know him from all these things, but one thing that you do know, Steve is a badass. And he is a super nice guy, and it was a lot of fun to talk to him today. On Monday, December 12th, 2016, the Nashville Drummer Jam will be doing a tribute to Steve Smith. And if you can be here in Nashville to see it, you can see and experience how deep this drummer has influenced so many of us. My thanks to them, of course, for connecting me with Steve and making this interview possible. We were going to try and do it over Skype, as he is on the West Coast, but a phone call was the best we could do. So Mike Jackson was able to help me clean some of this up, and it sounds pretty good. But I can tell you that if you have headphones, it might be a little bit clearer. As always, you can go to workingdrummer.net to find out more about this podcast and other interviews that we've done. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. While you're at the website, you can do a quick survey until the 15th of December. We've got that survey up there. It takes 20 seconds to do. It's really helpful for us. And if you do the survey, you will be entered into a contest to win some heads from Aquarian. Please rate and review our podcast on iTunes. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the podcast where an episode will be sent to your smart device. Every week, every Wednesday, we have a new episode. So we all love vintage gear, and I bet you know someone that owns an old Les Paul or maybe a 56 Fender Strat that never leaves the home. And the question is, why do we love this gear? It looks cool, it gives you that warm, handcrafted tone, and often brings a unique vibe to the music. Of course, it has its limitations, and if we're talking drums, we run into problems like its fragility, limited tuning. It's no wonder why these old instruments never see the light of the stage. So where am I going with this? Well, once again, I went back out to KHS America in Mount Juliet, Tennessee to spend some time with some vintage gear. I'm talking about the Sonar Vintage Series kit. I had seen and heard these at Summer NAMM, but now I had a little one-on-one with these beautiful drums. 12, 14, 22, and a matching snare. The kick drum, of course, was 14 inches in depth, as it is with all their kick drums, which is awesome. Some specs you should know that make these drums a modern vintage kit. The shells are that hand-selected premium German beech shell with rounded bearing edges. Keep in mind, this comes from the same forest of beechwood trees that were used in the manufacturing of Sonar drums from the 1960s. The same wood. The recreated teardrop lugs are a big deal. They look and feel just like the original, but now it has Sonar's exclusive tune-safe system. In other words, they stay in tune. There are many beautiful finishes you can choose from, like the Vintage Pearl and my favorite, the Red Oyster. And if you include the lightweight series hardware with a setup, these drums would look right at home in a scene from the show Mad Men. It looks, sounds, and feels like a vintage kit, but maintains the quality and reliability of a modern kit. You could really call this a modern vintage kit. So go to us.sonar.com to learn more about the Vintage Series and find a dealer near you. So let's get to it. Here is Steve Smith.
I just finished touring for the year, actually, the other day.
Okay.
Which, it's, like most years, it's been really crazy. Lots and lots of different gigs. And so I'm finally, off as far as being on tour. I'm off for the rest of the year, which feels really great. And, you know, I have lots of things to do and songs to work on for next year and stuff. But it's good not to be touring right now because, you know, every year the touring is it's intense, you know, and the year with Journey and all these other projects that I did, it's, you know, it's as busy as any year that I do. But there's always a natural slowdown around December and early January that seems to occur, which is, you know, at that point I welcome that because the year from, let's say, the NAMM show until Thanksgiving is usually crazy busy.
Right,
For me, every year it's like that.
It seems like the industry works around the holidays. It's kind of built into the touring schedule that I think most people experience.
Yeah, we take some downtime at that point.
Yeah. On that note, I mean, this has been I guess, I'm trying to remember when exactly you started back with Journey. Was that late last year?
Well, the announcement was a year ago, basically like last Thanksgiving time, a year from now. It was a year past, you know, like November 2015, it was announced that I would be touring with Journey this year. So I really started this year, 2016.
Okay.
And so my first dates were in April of this year. And then we started at Madison Square Garden, co-headlining with Santana. And then we finished in the Bay Area at AT&T Park on September 4th. And that was like another one with like all these Bay Area headliners, really. It was us and Santana, Steve Miller, Doobie Brothers, and Tower of Power.
Oh, wow.
And then since that time, I've been out doing my own gigs. And then this last weekend, we had 2 gigs with Journey, like kind of under the radar, you know, corporate gigs that we just did in Palm Springs and Scottsdale, Arizona. And now, you know, that was officially done for the year. But, you know, right after the Journey tour ended, I did a week at Birdland with a great acoustic group playing the music of John Coltrane.
Oh, wow.
Because I play there I play Birdland at least 2 weeks out of the year, and that third week of September is John Coltrane's birthday celebration week. So for the past 3 years, I've done that gig. I'm signed up for it next September as well. So, and that's a great group with Steve Kuhn on piano, and he actually played with Train in the early 60s. And then 2 great sax players, Jaleel Shah on alto and Eric Alexander on tenor, and Ronnie Plaxico on bass. And it's totally acoustic, straight ahead. And I use like a little jazz kit with an 18-inch bass drum and, you know, 1 rack tom and a couple of ride cymbals. And so that was, in a way, it was like, I needed the balance after 5 months of rocking with Journey.
Yeah.
And so I booked a bunch of other gigs, and then the next week I was in Tokyo with Steps Ahead, with an interesting incarnation of the group. It had Bill Evans on sax, Randy Brecker on trumpet, Mike Maneri on vibes, and Tom Kennedy on bass. And we played for 3 nights at the Blue Note in Tokyo. Then I went right from there to Europe, and I did a week with Bobby Shue Big Band, featuring like Buddy Rich alumni like Pat LaBarbera and Andy Fusco and Chuck Finley and Bobby Shue, and we played the whole Buddy Rich book, like 2 sets of Buddy Rich music, and took that on tour of Europe, which was super fun. And actually, in some ways, I felt the most difficult to play in a way of just the demands of a big band.
Really?
Because like playing with a small group, that is really free, and mainly I have to really watch my dynamics because everyone's in the group is an acoustic musician, you know, the upright bass, piano, and the saxophone. So, but I found that I could keep my volume well under control. I didn't play all that hard on the Journey tour. That was something I was focused on, was not playing too loud, not playing in a way that was going to hurt me in the end, physically hurt me or anything, and play as musically as possible. And I did that. And that was something I was actually concerned about when I said I'd do the tour. I didn't know what it would be like.
Right. And you had mentioned with your interview with Daniel Glass that he asked about your playing and if it would change, if you would be more physically engaged and even just from a viewing standpoint, playing harder, and you said no. You were going to just keep it under control in that way. And there's lots of videos online, of course, from this tour that it's been fun to watch. And you obviously playing at a volume, but it's encouraging to see and hear the sounds that you're getting without having to go just crazy and arms above your head, but you're just getting this great sound and great energy from it without. And I know we have a lot of listeners that are over the age of 40, as I am, and so it's like we're always looking to that. How do we continue to play at a level and a volume and an intensity without hurting ourselves?
Right. Well, and that's really well put. But as the tour went on, I naturally got a little stronger, and so probably by the end of the tour, I was playing in such a way that it wouldn't be possible for me to play at the beginning of the tour. Yet it was still all within a range of being very controlled.
Right.
But being a student of history and like you mentioned, like Daniel Glass, his interview, and he and I, pretty good buds, and we really have dug into the history, and of course I was a teenager in the 60s when I first heard Hendrix with Mitch Mitchell and Ginger Baker with Cream and all of that. And if you go back and really analyze deeply, look into the way those drummers played as far as volume and intensity, and compare it to drummers today, certain ones like that you're saying are like really their sticks are way up over their heads and they're slamming the drums. Drummers did not play like that in that era of the 60s.
Right.
They were still playing very much like the volume of maybe the shout chorus of a big band. And they had 7A or 5A sticks. It was before, big fat sticks, and they had thin cymbals and ambassador heads.
And not everything was mic'd all the time.
Not everything was mic'd, that's true, and that was somewhat of a problem for those drummers. But take from Charlie Watts to Ringo to Mitch Mitchell and Ginger Baker, they sound fantastic. They sounded great, but they weren't beating their kits mercilessly, Right. And over the years, with the advent of a few turning points like MTV, so things became more visual because of videos, and drummers started to exaggerate movements just for physical, visual sense, to punk music, becoming popular, where, drummers that really, in the original days of punk, and I'm not talking about the offshoots of punk, but the original punks, was the idea was, I'm not going to learn how to play this instrument, but I'm going to be on stage and I'm going to be in a band, and those guys just slamming the drums. And then I think people want to play in a way that they imagined John Bonham played, and they imagined he had to play in order to get a big, fat, deep groove. And so they slam the drums. They play the drums very hard, but it's it's really not the case. Even Bonham himself didn't play that hard compared to the drummers of today. The drummers of today, a lot of them are probably much louder than John Bonham ever played. But some of what they lose the plot of, in my opinion, is internal balance. Like, internal balance is really, to me, the key to all of this. So if you just take the kit and just look at it as an acoustic instrument, and it needs to sound like a cohesive instrument on its own, you have to make judgments of how to play, which volume to play each limb. Mm-hmm. And when I'm playing rock, that starts with the bass drum. So whatever the volume that I play the bass drum at, let's say, and it's going to shift depending on the song, whether it's a ballad, whether it's a medium tempo rock or up tempo, like, this powerful as you want. Everything's gauged when that situation by the volume that I play the bass drum. So I don't want to play the snare drum like radically louder than I play the bass drum, because it's going to feel top heavy. And so I tuck the snare drum in so it's about equal to slightly below the volume of the bass drum, and then I keep the cymbals below that. So it doesn't feel top heavy. Wow. So I mix myself as I play, and then I want the toms to jump. I'll play the toms at the appropriate volume. So that inner balance all makes sense. And again, like, especially when I do drum camps and I see young drummers play, like, they're very unaware of those individual limbs and what volume each limb is playing at. They just hit the drums hard. And are not thinking about that overall balance.
Right.
And that's the key. That's the key to not hurting yourself, is to really keep your inner balance really under control.
And we've discussed this with some other people at times about mixing yourself and creating, as far as if you need to adjust the volume of the hi-hat, you don't turn it down in the mix. You adjust your playing. And this is a thing that
nothing new. This is the way drummers have been playing ever since the beginning of the drum set 100 years ago, only until somewhat recently they started losing the plot.
And I think that there's something that has happened recently that might be a reason for that. And this is an issue that I ran into a couple years ago. I was using in-ears quite a bit over the course of a year. And then when I started doing some other work without in-ears, I noticed that my hi-hat was really heavy-handed. And I think it just this habit developed over time where I was unaware of my own balance and controlling that. And so I'm curious, watching you play with Journey and knowing that in-ears is now a part of that gig, which it normally isn't for other gigs that you do.
Yeah, I used in-ears this year for the first time.
Right.
I'd never used it before.
Did you notice? I mean, I know it's only been since April, technically, since the tour, but have you noticed a difference in the way you approach the instrument as far as your balance?
No, because, there's a couple of things. Number one, I record every gig. I have every gig that I played, like all 62 gigs. So, and I record it with my Zoom, just set up by my drone. So I hear the actual acoustic sound of the drums in my balance. And if I don't know if you know, every Saturday on my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/vitalinformation.
Okay.
I put up a solo, like a different solo from something that I've done in the week or two before. So I'll put up a different Journey drum solo or something from Birdland gig, or put something up from that Steps Ahead gig in Tokyo, something from the Bobby Shoe tour. So I can really keep track of my volume because I listen to it, and I'm pretty critical about what it sounds like, and I'm hearing just the acoustic sound of the drum on that Zoom. That's what you hear on that.
Okay.
And the other thing is the type of in-ears that I got. They have this they have these additional speakers or microphones that are like in the in-ears themselves, so I can actually hear the acoustic sound of the drum set.
Wow, okay.
And I actually can't remember the name of them. Oh, I can't remember the name of these, but they're really a great. They're expensive. They were like $2,000 or something, but they're really amazing in-ears in that you get the mix of the band and then you have a separate knob that you just hear what is right in front of you, so you can
incredible.
Actually physically hear your own instrument. So I hear it real clearly.
That's definitely not the ears that I was using.
Sensiphonic. That's what they're called. Sensiphonic.
Sensiphonic. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I've often wondered about that, if there was a way to keep that. Because sometimes if the advantage of using ears from time to time is when you're playing on a large stage, or if you need to run a click for any reason or tracks, you've got that direct point to reference.
Yeah, with Journey, it makes total sense because also I'm playing hard enough where it would be bad for my ears if I didn't have them. Where my other gigs, I don't need like in-ears, and I don't need ear protection because I don't play that hard, and I really need to hear what the other guys in the band are doing. And most of the time I have almost no monitoring or very little monitoring, but just enough to hear like a piano and a sax or whatever the other instruments are.
Did you do anything?
Because I want to blend on stage with the players, so I'm really relying on just like hearing them acoustically.
Did you do anything to prepare physically for this tour?
Yeah, for the Journey tour, yeah, definitely. Like the first thing I did is about 2 months before the tour, I started working on the tunes because, first of all, I didn't remember them at all. It's been 32 years since I played any of the Journey songs. And so I just went to, right back to, I transcribed the records. I transcribed what I played on those records.
And this was me?
So I could relearn. Yeah, and it was like, oh, that's pretty good. I actually thought the parts were pretty good. But in some ways, they were a little looser than I remembered them. And that's kind of interesting. Where like a lot of the sessions that I did in the 90s and early 2000s for people, they'd have these demos, and I would make a chart. And the demo would have like a drum groove for the verse and then another drum groove for the chorus. But it was very exact, and I would play things like that on a record. But when I went back to the Journey music, yes, I had like a groove for the verse and a different groove for the chorus, but it wasn't as exact as things became things got over that last 30 years. Mm-hmm. I was still very loose with it, very free with it. And that I didn't know or remember. But like if I looked at Stone in Love, for instance, I thought I played the exact same part here for the verse and then a different one for the chorus. And then when I transcribed it, I was like totally loose, it was really different. And pretty much the same with all the tunes, except for like Don't Stop Believing. That was like a really exact part that I played on the record. But a lot of the stuff was pretty loose. But anyway, so I just, went back and relearned all that. And then I saved my double bass kit from the 80s, my kit that I played on Captured, Escape, and Frontier. It's the same drum set. Wow. And so it was 2 24-inch bass drums and, 6 toms. And so I practiced on that. So that had been a while. Plus I had developed the idea over time of using 3 snare drums, which I got used to with Vital Information, even like having a detuned snare to my left and then a high-pitched snare to the left of that, like a 12-inch snare. There's a high-pitched snare, a 14-inch snare, detuned for like ballads or heavy rockers, and then the main snare. So I got used to playing on, and since I was touring with Hiromi for the last 3 years, I've been subbing for Simon Phillips. I started playing more open-handed because I had to learn tunes that, put drum parts that he played, and using 3 floor tones because he had like the real deep floor tones. So that I integrated into this new double bass kit, which was a lot of fun and interesting and challenging, to play such a big kit. So, I spent a couple months working out on that and really physically training in a way of like, yoga.
Mm-hmm.
I have a yoga teacher that came to the house 3 days a week, and we do like 90-minute sessions, like not a yoga class, but a private lesson, so it was really in detail.
Awesome. Yeah.
And I just do, and I tend to, and then on tour, I continue to do yoga like pretty much every day, and then before and especially after the show, just to really stretch out the muscles and make sure that I don't get tightened.
Yeah, I love yoga. Is there anything special, like a certain discipline within yoga that you're doing, or is it kind of more of a standard? I hate to use that word, but something that we're more familiar with?
Yeah, it's not. I don't think it has a particular name, but it's just breathing. That's the number one thing, and then holding the positions of the asanas, and then and really making sure that my technique is good. So again, I'm not hurting myself.
It's a practice for sure.
Yeah, and having a private teacher is really a great way to go with that, because I'm getting constant feedback and corrections, and I've been doing it I've been doing for about 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
But I really stepped it up right before the tour, and then kept doing it, and I still do it, pretty much every day.
That's great.
That's something that's really helped over the years, because I have had injuries and gone to physical therapy, but I've been able to rehabilitate myself from whatever injury it was without any kind of surgery or anything.
So there's balance poses in yoga, and one of the things that I find really interesting is there's a balance component to playing on the drum set to a degree where you're moving all four limbs and you're centered. There's this center chi that you deal with when you're on the stool, and sometimes you have to, everybody kind of has a different way of approaching it, whether it's putting more weight on one side but I have seen some players that seem like they have such a strong center of gravity where everything is moving at once. And I'm so envious of that independence in that way. And do you notice, has that been a benefit as well with the yoga as far as being able to do some of that balance or core strength? Is that?
Yeah, definitely the yoga comes into play in a lot of ways. It has to do with, like you're saying, being centered and how I sit on the drum throne, and the being aware of like how my hips should be, how my feet are aligned with the middle of my knee.
Yeah.
And then the lower back is sort of like sticking your butt out, and then having it pulling the core in, so everything falls into place. But here's another I guess aspect of how to be very balanced on the drum set is to not rely on having your feet on the pedals in any kind of position to maintain your basic balance. And by that, I mean a lot of drummers sit down and they put the beater against the bass drum head and then have their heel up and then their foot closed on the hi-hat, and that is their starting point.
Right.
Now, if that's a starting point, that's a disadvantage, because you don't want to have your beater on the head as a balance point, or the hi-hat closed as a balance, as to get your center. So my center comes from feet flat on the pedals, heels down, and the beaters off the head and the hi-hats open.
I see.
That's my starting point. Now that's a balance. Then if I want to play from there, I come back to that as my center.
Interesting.
And I see this all the time, especially with doing these drum fantasy camp and different drum camps that I do. If you need to have your feet on the pedals as your starting point, you're already at a disadvantage.
Yeah. And where does seat height come into that?
Seat height is that your hip has to be slightly above your knee. Mm-hmm. If your hip is below your knee, that's a recipe for back issues.
Yes.
If your thigh is parallel to the ground, that's better. But the best position for your for your back, and then in a way, and also to manipulate the pedals, is to have your hip slightly above your knee. So that's how I gauge the seat height. And then the snare drum, just as I hold the stick and then extend, have my elbows in and hands at rest, wherever the tip of the stick is where the top of the snare drum falls.
I got into town a couple of days ago and grabbed the book and
the Pathways of Motion.
Pathways of Motion, and started digging into it actually late last night. With the holidays, I have family in town, so as everyone was kind of turning in, I was like, I'll see you guys in the morning, and put the DVD in, and I thought, I'll kind of see what this is about. And then, of course, an hour later, I'm like, uh-oh. I play match grip. I have all my life, but I love jazz. I love what the left hand it can do. And one of the things you touched on briefly was, I believe it was grip 3, and you were talking about French grip and the ability of the left hand to have some of the nuanced technique that a traditional grip provides by using.
Yeah, exactly. Because, like with the, with the listeners not having the book in front of them, but basically like the first grip, it's just like how it's like the palm down German grip essentially. Mm-hmm. And then I call grip 1. And then grip 2 is that same grip, but opening the hand so there's a resonating chamber. You can hear the sticks resonate and the drum and cymbal opens up more, and it engages the fingers so you can have some more finger control, versus with grip 1, it's mainly like wrist. And with grip 2, you get wrist and finger together. And then grip 3 is like the thumbs up French grip, with the stick now cradled between the thumb and the first crease of all of the fingers. So with that grip, you really can get a lot of finger control, and you can get a little bit more of an angle of the tip of the stick to the head to get a lighter sound on the snare drum for some straight-ahead jazz playing, which is really one of the biggest advantages of traditional grip with the left hand when you're playing jazz, is you don't have the full tip of the drumstick on the head, which gives you already kind of a fat sound. But if you want a thinner sound, like a lighter sound, it's easy to get that with traditional grip because you can change the angle of the tip to the head easily. By just putting the stick, let's say, almost straight up and down as the hand, as like if your left hand is like about to shake someone's hand, position, and the stick can hang straight down. Well, then you can just have the tip of the stick on the drum. It's pretty much impossible to do that with match grip, but the closest you can get, like you said, is that grip 3, that French grip. And so, for instance, a lot of times for jazz drummers that watch Bill Stewart play, he'll play that left hand on the snare more from that position because of the sound. And I'm pretty sure
that's interesting you say that. Yeah, that's true.
He's getting that sound that he's hearing, and his body goes to that position to get that. And then grip 4 it's like then you go from that grip of French grip to then keeping the thumb up, but holding the stick just with the back 2 fingers, which now that's like a very strong sound. Because of the range of motion that you can engage with that grip number 4. You're not going to get the finesse of the fingers, but you can just get a big sound. And that's the way I see a lot of heavy rock drummers play from that grip kind of naturally, and that's the way Tony Williams played when he played match grip, with just holding the back 2 fingers like that. So every grip has its own sound and application and feel, and then I mix and match like you can play symmetrical match grip, or you can play a non-symmetrical match grip, or one hand might be in the French and the other hand might be in the German. Again, a lot of people do this stuff in a natural way, but are not really aware that they're doing it. And by bringing awareness to it, you just can harness these techniques more and practice in each particular position, so you can enhance your technique in each position.
It's interesting that you brought that up on the DVD, talking about this asymmetrical match grip depending on what needs to be done because each hand has a different role to play. Especially in jazz, where one is providing the chatter with the left hand and one is playing the ride cymbal. But there's times that I almost feel guilty when my hands aren't doing the same. But it's like you gave me the okay to like, look, if you need to play German grip to get the hi-hat thing that you're going for, and the left hand needs to be more of the French grip, then you got to do what you got to do to get the results.
Yeah, there's no there's no hard and fixed way of playing. It has to be whatever is right for the feel and the sound. But I'm suggesting that by spending time with each position, you can refine each position. So then, when you use it, it's going to be under your control.
Yeah. And you used a word, the embouchure of the grip. And I love that.
Yeah,
because we talk.
Yeah.
There's the embouchure of horn players, and it's like, well, you're playing an instrument, and this is your mouthpiece. In essence, is your hand, and all those different things. And also, you made a point to mention that this is drum set technique.
Right.
And I that was nice because one of my more recent interviews was with a really great player who was major into DCI drum corps playing and just has great facility and is a heavy hitter. And I really admire the chops that these players have who spent time doing that. And it's something I never did. And there's times I wish I did. I was obsessed with the drum set and just had no other room in my world for anything else growing up. And so I wish I had this, but it's nice that it's like, well, yeah, there is a drum set technique that comes from the approach that we take on this instrument. That's not DCI, that's not concert in many ways, and it has different application and different reasons.
Yeah, or classical technique, classical snare drum technique would be different, and then the drum corps technique, it really works for that world. And really one of the main reasons that it works for that world is because you're playing in a line with other snare drummers, for instance.
Right.
And you have to match stick heights for the visual effect of that.
I see.
So matching stick heights on the drum set, that's something that we don't do. Even if you're playing with two drums, nobody's trying to match stick heights. And the problem with matching stick heights is it takes you out of the natural flow of space and time being equal. Meaning, like if I move a certain amount of space, let's say on the ride cymbal, and I play a quarter note, and I pick my hand up and play another quarter note, and my hand fills space in between each one of those quarter notes. That's like an old-fashioned metronome that goes click, 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 and it has to fill a certain amount of space, so each one of those clicks is in time. So I don't see stick heights related to volume. I see stick heights related to time. So, and as I play faster, my stick's going to not come off the cymbals quite so far or away from the snare drum quite so far. So, so when we play the drum set, we want the loose grip of the sticks and then to be very free with our emotions. So we create a nice groove. And that's not really what's going on with drum corps. So this, in a way, I was focusing and saying, like, look, for you drum corps guys that want to play drum sets, let's consider, modifying your technique so it becomes free enough so it really works on the drum set.
Right. Time is in the air. It's not what you're playing on the drum or the cymbal. It's
the complete motion. Yeah. It's and we hear an impact, but the complete motion is really the key to getting a nice groove. And so let's just say, because with the drumstick we only hear half of the motion, whereas if you played a shaker or a tambourine, you hear both sides of the motion. But the drumstick, you only hear half of the motion, but still the entire motion is critical in order to get the right feel and to get the timing right.
I found an egg shaker floating around in my car last week, and so I love to practice, and I always feel like there's just not enough time in the day and the week to do what I want to do. So I thought, well, while I'm driving my kids around town, I'll just pick up the shaker, and I could just work on my time feel while I'm doing that.
Yeah, sure.
I get a lot of interesting looks at stoplights. Probably not as much in Nashville, but when you're in other towns, they probably wouldn't know what you're doing.
Right.
Well, that's great. So Pathways of Motion. I'm looking forward to digging into this some more, and for anybody that.
And I'm still working on all of it. It's still a work in progress for me. So that's just like gives you some ideas of some of the things that I'm working on myself. And it goes back to, you want to just take it one step back of how it even came up for me is I started playing more match grip to give my left hand traditional grip a break.
Yeah.
Because I was starting to get some deterioration of what it's called the CMC joint. It's the joint at the base of the thumb. So I started playing match grip, which felt like a little easier to do, but I realized how bad my technique was. So I started looking at what my right hand was doing and going, wow, my right hand is really refined. Let me just examine what I'm doing. And that's how I discovered my right hand was doing all this stuff, playing in all these positions and had very refined motion. So I just sat in front of the mirror and got my left hand to try to do exactly what my right hand was doing by, first of all, just playing like unison things, like exact unison.
I love that concept. That was a really mind-blowing idea, is that you're using one hand to teach the other hand. And when I read that yesterday, I thought, that's brilliant. Especially, you referenced this as well, how strong your right hand can be in certain positions because of the time that you spent playing the ride cymbal and how it knows. Especially exactly. As a French grip, for most of us, we understand that with the right hand more so than sometimes the left hand.
Yeah. So then I started playing just two ride cymbals, or like a ride cymbal on the right and playing the hi-hat, like just playing the jazz ride beat, for playing along with music and just playing time and just really examining.
It's got to be Pat Metheny, though. If you're going to do two ride cymbals, it's got to be Pat Metheny. Otherwise, what's the point? Channeling your inner Paul Wardico, I guess.
Or depending on which era.
Right, exactly.
Paul Wardico.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay,
Antonio Sanchez.
Oh, right.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's funny. So I want to talk about the Nashville Drummer Jam, and certainly give them some props for introducing me to you to make this happen. So big props to David Parks for making this happen. So just briefly, so people know, and we've helped support them in the past, and of course being local here in Nashville, at least I am. My co-host is based out of Atlanta right now. And is twice a year they do a tribute to a drummer, and it's in the past it's included everyone from most recently Phil Collins and Neil Peart and Alex Van Halen, Jeff Porcaro, John Bonham. And this December, you are the one who's the tribute is going to be for. I have the fortunate opportunity to live in a town with just so much talent and so many great drummers, and there's a great camaraderie amongst the drummers here and support amongst each other. So it's really nice to go out and support and see these great players, honor a lot of our heroes. So that being said, the question I have for you that ties into all this is, you seem to take on, I wrote this out, so I am literally reading this.
Okay.
You seem to take on the responsibility of being a drummer of influence with grace and integrity. What keeps you focused on the next thing, and does the responsibility ever become overwhelming? Is that heavy enough for you?
Question. Well, I think first of all, by being a band leader, and going on tour my Vital Information group, and then being in a situation where I'm being hired to be, let's say, like a featured sideman, like on tour with Mike Stern and Hiromi. Mm-hmm. There's a certain amount of expectation and pressure that comes with that, because people are coming to see, well, first of all, people are hiring me because of they want what I do. First of all, I think you'd say it has to do with a level of musicianship where we can communicate at a high level. Yes. We can make the music happen at a high level. And then a lot of times it's that the music is really hard, and they want somebody that can play really hard music. And sometimes I think, what have I got myself into here? Because sometimes people send me, like Hiromi will send me these charts, and they're in like 27/8, and it's like, oh my God, you just can't sit down and do that right away. But I have let's say the skills to know how to work myself up to that, and take steps, and takes time, and then, and learn music, learn this difficult music, but then get on stage and perform it. So there's just a certain drive that I have that I put myself into these positions of, and then, but careful what you wish for, because then you got to come through and deliver. And it's always a challenge, but there's something about it that keeps music for me interesting, keeps my life interesting, that I put myself in those positions, or clinic tour, or an appearance at some drum festival or whatever. So in a way, I've conditioned myself to be in these fairly stressful situations, but come through with hopefully living up to people's expectations. But I work pretty hard at it, and so even though I'm off, I'm still practicing and working on music and working on ideas, and so I don't know that I'm looking. You said the phrase something like the next thing, or what. I'm really just dealing with what's going on right now.
Sure.
And what's the next? I think maybe what's the next thing coming up for me, but I know what it is, so I have the boundaries that I'm working within. Like then, like I was talking about after the Journey tour, I had like these other tours. Well, okay, I had to learn particular music for the Steps gig, so tunes for the Coltrane thing. So, I know what I'm going to do that week, and then I start like a couple of weeks before, start working on it, and then when I finished that European tour with Bobby Shu's band, then I had a 2-week clinic tour of China.
Wow.
Well, that's a chance for me to do my own thing. It's pretty much wide open. Mm-hmm. And so I prepared a bunch of solo pieces that I wanted to play there. And of course I'm going to be teaching and talking about music, and of course through a translator, so I have to be careful not to go too far, because it's too difficult with the language barrier to get too deep into it. But to try to come up with a plan of what to talk about, where I'm general enough that it's going to come across to the audience, and then with certain questions, okay, then I can get specific if I have certain questions from the audience. But I prepared a lot of solo pieces that included Indian rhythms and conical and all this kind of stuff. So it was my chance to do that, like more or less, let's say, like a solo tour. So I wanted to cover a lot of bases, and so I do that, and it's I don't know how else to answer it other than I put these challenges in front of myself, and then just put myself through whatever it takes to get to the end result.
Well, and I think this other question is kind of related to that. Is there's you have and before the Journey tour came about, it seems like there's a lot, and you mentioned band leading. How much of your schedule happens organically, or how instrumental are you in creating this schedule to fill your year out?
Yeah, it's well, at this point, it's something like 50-50.
Okay.
But if we go back to somewhere in the 90s, my focus was just to take everything that came my way, and to do sessions, to do recording sessions, studio work, and to do touring with different bands that called, like, not rock bands. I was not interested. Like, I did have a couple calls from rock bands, but I just was only interested in playing jazz live. And so that's led to, like, Steps Ahead and Mike Stern and different, Bill Evans, and touring with different people like that.
Yeah.
And then I'd get calls for clinic tours, and Sylvian or Zoner would put something together. But somewhere in the late 90s, early 2000s, I decided that I was really going to take myself, like, out of the loop of studio playing, because after a while, it was like an itch. I scratched the itch, and and I got it. In other words, I did the studio work to the point where I felt like I could do a good job at it, but then it felt like no longer necessary to continue to do it. What I did want to do was be a band leader. That became more important. And I realized I really couldn't do both, because if I booked the sessions, I couldn't get my agent. Then I got an agent to book my band, and I need to set time aside. Like, we have, like, the whole month of October, or like October, November, and, for you to work on trying to get us a tour of Europe, for instance. So she would, like, so I have to have time set aside that I'm not going to book anything else. And so that was like a big change around the early 2000s, that I more or less took control of saying, I'm not available for anything other than being my own band leader for this 2 months here. And then maybe like March, April, May, at this part of the beginning of the year. But the middle of the summer, usually, like, it was like something like a European tour with a jazz group, because that's when most European tours happen with jazz groups. So I'd be a sideman, because I wasn't a big enough name to be a band leader in the summer jazz tours of Europe, but I was a big enough name to be a sideman with Randy Brecker and Bill Evans in Soul Bop, or Mike Maneri, Steps Ahead, or Mike Stern Quartet, or something like that. Mm-hmm. So that's why I would do the summertime jazz tours in Europe, and they pay real well. They pay much better than being a band leader. and then I would be a band leader for a couple of months in other times of the year. And so that focus of having an agent and setting aside time and booking gigs, that just has developed. So to the point where now, like right before I did, Journey this year, I could fill up a lot of touring with other people, and then touring, for not a lot with my own band, but it would be like, a month at the beginning of the year and a month towards the end of the year, like spring and fall. And then, various gigs. Living in New York, I have an apartment in New York, and I spend at least half of the year in New York, like just gigs around New York. And so it's like I get a lot of calls. I probably say no to about 50% of my calls.
Wow. Thanks for saying
just
yes.
Because, today. Yeah, and it's just and it's because I can't make them. That's mm-hmm. Maybe I just can't make it, or certain things I really don't want to do. Like there's certain sessions I don't want to do. Like somebody will call me and it's like, an unknown artist, and I want you to play on 4 songs, and do you have a home studio? Can you do this? Mm-hmm. Well, no, I don't have a home studio. And even if I did, I don't really want to do it. Because I just would rather do something else. There's something else that's more interesting for me to do. 20 years ago, I probably would have said yes. But things change as you get older, and things change as your priorities change. And I've been fortunate that I've been able to follow my own artistic inclinations, and there are enough people that want to hear what I
Well, and it
do.
sounds like it's taken a little bit of time.
I'd say.
Is that the understatement? Is that the understatement of this interview right now?
Yeah, no, it takes time. I'm 63 years old, but it's and so I've been working on this for 40 years, basically. Practicing and keeping your chops up, and I do that in between my touring, but it doesn't take the place of playing music with other musicians.
Yes, yeah.
So you can't just practice jazz and expect your jazz chops to stay up, because you need to be in the moment of making those decisions and playing with people and having that experience. That's what develops in any style. And in fact, that's a big reason of why I booked so much work for myself after that 5-month Journey tour. It's a balance. It balances out things as far as yin yang. Just the playing in the big rock world for 5 months like that. Well, I needed the balance of playing acoustic jazz in a jazz club, and playing with a big band, and playing with a fusion group, and checking in like a diagnostic, make sure I can still do all this stuff.
Right.
I just really wanted to do that and stay in touch with that. So I get what you're saying, and it's important if it's important to you to stay in touch with like lots of different things. You just have to try to get those gigs, like book some gigs.
Yes.
Schedule them in there and do them, and
there's only so much you can do in the practice room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's good. It's important stuff to do, but it's not the same as actually getting out playing.
Right. Another thing, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is Neil Peart talks about the time that he worked with you on the Burning for Buddy project, and noticed this change in your playing, or noticed just at the level that you were playing at. And I've heard this story before. It was like, what happened? And you said Freddie Gruber. And then he went that direction. What was that experience like? And was there anything significant about what he taught you that maybe affected your playing from that point on?
Well, first of all, there's a lot that he taught me.
I can imagine.
Definitely, is with me, permanently with me. But just for a little bit of background, Neil Peart and I played on an album together, a Jeff Berlin record called Champion.
Wow.
And we actually played. Yeah, that's how he was familiar with, let's say, before and after. He played we were in the studio together to play with Jeff Berlin. It was an album, like I said, called Champion. It was Jeff Berlin's first solo record, and then it was with Scott Henderson on guitar, T. Lavitz on keyboards, and I played drums on 90% of the record. Neil played on one song, and then one song we played together, double drums.
Oh.
And that was 86 or something like that. It was somewhere in the, and so I was still very much playing in the Journey style, that I had played with traditional grip, quite a bit of traditional grip, but holding the sticks way in the back and not really being aware of the balance point and things like that. The funny thing is, if you go back far enough in my background, I had good technique when I was in high school, but then I compromised it when I went on tour with Journey, because I have pictures of myself playing in those days, and my grip looks exactly the same as it looks now. But then I compensated for volume and thought I had to play real loud with Journey in the 80s, and so came up with a way of doing it, but it compromised my technique. But I really wasn't so insightful that I knew what I was doing at that time. But Freddie, to help me by, opened me up to being aware of the balance point. That was really the first lesson, was learning where the balance point of the stick was. So once I set an object into motion, it stayed in motion, versus every stroke being an individual event. And if you don't use balance point to like have a stick sort of being in perpetual motion, each stroke is an individual event. So it becomes much harder to play. And so, he would start maybe with the ride cymbal and how you can just play the ride cymbal in such a way where it sort of feels like it plays itself after a while, and you get out of the way. And that's like a lot of his message is how to get out of your own way and let the sticks just do the work. You set it in motion, but allow rebound to happen. That's like a big part of it. And I covered a lot of this on my 2002 DVD, Drum Set Technique History of the USB.
Okay.
But I will point out it's very similar to the way JoJo plays. It's like that, it's universal principles of motion. It's the way that Freddie called it. He had a little phrase, universal principles of motion. So it was, when you drop a drumstick and you're holding it in the right balance point, what it wants to do is simply, rebound, and then it'll come down and hit the drum head again and come back again. Whereas if you hold the stick tightly or without the balance point, the stick comes down and it goes boom, and then it stops.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of what he's talking about or talked about was getting that stick to just stay in motion once you set it in motion. So anyway, my lessons with Freddie they started in about 1990, I think. It's hard to remember exactly, but it was either 90 or 91. And Ian Wallace introduced me to Freddie, and Peter Erskine had told me, Freddie's looking for you, because he saw my 1987 DCI video and said, I can help this guy. so he had Peter called me and said, Freddie Gruber's looking for you. And I was like, who's Freddie Gruber? And so he told me, he's this drum guru that lives in L.A. And anyway, I eventually met him, and I could relate to his methods and his message. And so my lessons with him would be something like, in his house for 6 hours. And out of that and it would be from 10 p.m. to whatever, 4 o'clock in the morning or something. Yeah. And out of that, we'd have maybe one good hour of a lesson.
That's hilarious.
Because otherwise it was just he'd just talk about everything from his health insurance to his girlfriend or whatever. It was just, it was a very unique experience. But I was able to take that, and then I worked on a few ideas for a few months, and then I go back and see him again for another 6 hours immersion. And so that would be 4 times a year over the course of about 3 or 4 years. And so I started to really understand what he was saying, and I could harness the ideas and work on them. And they take time. It's, a lot of this stuff is super subtle and just takes a very relaxed approach where you just drop in the stick and watching it bounce, and then figuring out how to move your hand so that continues to stay in motion. So I think by 1993, that's when I did that Buddy Rich record that Neil produced with Buddy Rich Big Band, and then he saw me playing, and it was like, what happened to you?
Yeah.
You're playing really different than when we did that record together with Jeff Berlin. And so I told him that I'd been studying with Freddie Gruber, and of course Freddie happened to be there at those Buddy Rich sessions because he was such a good friend of Buddy Rich's, and he was there visiting the guys in the band and saying hi to Chaffee, and so Kathy Rich, Buddy's daughter, and so they met, at that point. And I know Neil spent time studying with Freddie as well. And a similar thing happened with Dave Lecco too. Dave asked me about what I was doing because he could see the difference in my playing, and I told him about Freddie. Now he already knew Freddie, but didn't really know if he should take him seriously or not. And I said, yeah. You should take him seriously. He knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
So then, Dave ended up studying with him, and that really, developed it's like fine-tuned is technique. And in a way, that's what I think I got from Freddie. I already had pretty good technique and good foundation to begin with, and Freddie just helped me really focus and fine tune it as he did with Dave as well.
But it also, you also mentioned just the time factor and just being patient, and these things take time. And sometimes that's a tough thing sometimes to want to. It's hard to accept that, I guess is what I'm saying. Sometimes, in our, I guess, in instant society, one of the things I wanted to ask you, maybe kind of closely related to that idea, is, the way musicians and drummers learn their instrument and learn music and learn to create music has changed so much, especially in the last 10, 15 years. What's your take on that, as far as kind of how the internet has delivers information and people are learning? What is your opinion about how that may shape the future of music and musicians?
Okay. Well, I do see that there are a lot of drummers, young drummers, that can really play the instrument. Mm-hmm. They are able to play. I just was in China and I did a bunch of clinics there, and they would have, and they were at music schools. Most of them were music or like drum schools, so they'd have young people as, let's say, the opening act, like in one city, like a 12-year-old girl went out and played a Dave Weckl play along in 7 with a left foot clave, and she played it really well. I mean, it was kind of amazing. It wasn't not kind of. It was amazing.
Right.
And so I've seen things like that often these days, where young people are playing, let's say, at a higher level than people of my generation may have done. But I do think, there's a big but, is that she was playing with a track, with headphones on and playing extremely loud, and, all the things that would get you fired if you were doing that in real time with real musicians, especially acoustic musicians. Mm-hmm. So there, it's like there's no substitute for playing with real musicians, that, so we can, people can learn how to play the instrument. Mm-hmm. They can learn, play along with play along tracks and play with headphones and get to high skill levels, but that's still then to take the step of playing with musicians and playing real music without a click track, without a track, and acoustically control your levels and keep time without clicks, and keep time and play just like the definition of a good drummer when I grew up was one that could play nice feel and steady time and had good musicianship. I don't think that will ever go out of style.
Right.
So I guess where I see it going is, a lot of people may have highly developed drumming skills, but they still have to develop their musicianship. And really, there's no substitute for that other than playing with live musicians and playing on stage and in a club and all the different environments that we play, and learning how to play in a room. Like, there's, like, again, one of the most overlooked concepts of, like, playing so it's totally appropriate for the size of the room that you're in. Yeah. Like, when I teach at Drum Fantasy Camp and we're in the classroom, the size of a classroom, like where you went to 3rd grade or something, but you're playing as if you're playing at Madison Square Garden, there's a disconnect there. Yeah. It's like, hey, look at the size of the room we're in. You're blowing us all out of the room. Like, play in a way so it sounds good, and I don't have to hold my ears when I'm sitting 5 feet away from you, as if I was an acoustic bass player and on one side and an acoustic piano on another. Do you have the control to do that? No. Probably for the most part, no is the answer for most of them. So, so it's got its plus, and then not that that's a minus that they still need to go through the.
But it's something
but they may not be aware of that yet.
Mm-hmm,
but hopefully they'll figure that out. They'll have to, otherwise, their life will be just posting play-alongs on the internet.
Well, and it seems like a lot of those concepts are more important now than ever because people can recreate with samples and I mean just some of the things that I hear young producers create in the studio without a human drummer sounds pretty amazing. I mean, relative to 10, 15, 20 years ago. So it almost seems like that stuff has more currency because all those concepts, the musicianship, the ability to play to a room and all those things, because that's what, if they're going to hire a person to play the drums, even in the studio or otherwise, you have to be able to do all those things. Otherwise, a machine can do. You know what I'm saying? I guess it's
but you're forgetting, like, okay, working drummer. That's your name of your podcast. Okay, so let's say you live in Kansas City and you're not getting called to do a studio gig. You're getting called to play in a jazz trio at the local, high-end hotel in the center of town, or an R&B gig at a club or something. Mm-hmm. And so, there's drummers like this all over the U.S., all over the world, that are working drummers. They're not necessarily getting hired to be on a record. They're just they're working, and maybe they're not even professional musicians. Maybe they just play on the weekends or something like that. But that skill of musicianship is what is going to have them keep them getting callbacks and expanding their world and keeping them working. Right. Is that musicianship. And some people are playing along with tracks and doing that kind of stuff even in local gigs, but for the most part it still gets down to being able to keep time without a click and just playing with musicians and making it feel good and having a nice communication with the people that you're on stage with.
Yeah, you're very right. And that's another thing that has been wonderful about having, back in January, I started working with a co-host, Zach Albetta, who's a great player, a great jazz player, and is now living in Atlanta. But he spent time in Kansas City where he studied, and he spent probably about 6 years in L.A. working. So he's bringing a lot of that element that sometimes isn't as pervasive here in a music business town like Nashville, where you are expected to do, there's a list, a criteria of, working with ears, working with the click, working with tracks, all these things. Not obviously a lot of them, but that just seems to be the
and that's something the new musician has to be able to do.
Exactly.
But let's not lose track of like the basics. Yes. The other, the basics.
Yes.
Is just playing with musicians and having good time. Why did Hal Blaine get called so much and Bernard Purdy to do those records that they did? It wasn't because they played with clicks, because they didn't play with clicks. Mm-hmm. They had good time without clicks. Yes. Ringo had good time without a click. Yes. All of those records that we love and from the 60s and 70s, they I'd say probably very few of them were ever made with clicks or anything like that. So the definition of a good drummer when I grew up was that you had to have good time, good feel, and a good time. And I never even played with a click, I don't think, until 1985. And that was a rough transition for me. But none of the Journey records up until Raised on Radio, none of those were done with clicks.
Wow.
So Frontiers, and Evolution and Escape and all of those records, we played. And we weren't unique, that's what all bands did in those days.
Right.
So that kind of musicianship doesn't go out of style.
Yeah, I love that. Steve, I really appreciate this, man. I'm excited to share this with our listeners, and I just appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Sure.
Awesome.
And as far as the tribute in Nashville, it was Ed Toth that told me about that, because I toured with him all summer, like the Doobies were on tour with Journey, and we had a great time, and I loved listening to him play every night. And he was the one that told me about this, and I was like, at first, like, kind of scratching my head, like, what do you mean, a tribute to me? It's like, I'm not old enough. I'm like, or maybe I am, and I'm still alive, like the only tributes I've done are like for Buddy Rich or people that are no longer with us. So it was kind of a little bit of a surprise to hear that. But then I heard, okay, like Alex Van Halen and all these other guys, they're still with us. So then I felt okay about it. but it's pretty interesting. It's an honor, really, that, drummers get together and want to play music that I've played. And so I know a lot of people are going to be playing Journey tunes. I think at least one person hopefully will play a Vital Information tune.
Yeah, for sure.
So it sounds like a great event, and I'd like to be there, but I won't be able to be there. But I look forward to hearing all about it.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun, and again, it showcases the community that this town has amongst the drummers, and it's really a lot of fun. And it's for charity, and so...
Yeah, Make-A-Wish, like whatever money we were able to make, we'll donate to Make-A-Wish, which is a great charity. Yeah,
wonderful. No, this is great. And again, looking forward to digging into your book, and I just can't thank you enough for taking a little bit of time.
Yeah, great. Well, let me just, I want to mention one more thing, because I'm pretty much focused on this like every day. We're in the final details of this, but I'm working with a company called Scene 4, and I put out some artwork a couple of years ago.
Yes, I saw that.
The website is called stevesmithdrumart.com, and they came up with the idea of like rhythm on canvas is what they call it. So you go into the darkened room, would play with lighted drumsticks, and they do a time-lapse photography, and it comes up with some pretty awesome images that then are put on canvas. So the next step is they want to put out a book with all of these images, and I have 13 pieces. Mm-hmm. So my idea, and I was pretty inspired. It was at the beginning of this year. It was January of this year when we started talking about it. And the Journey tour was coming, and I wanted to just document some creativity. So when they had the idea of doing the book, I said, what if I make a different drum solo for each piece of art and create like a solo album, literally, where each solo is related to one of these pieces of art.
Wow.
Which they like the idea. And it'll be in the book as an LP. As a vinyl record.
Okay.
So I booked studio time, went into the studio, and treated it like I was making a serious album, but played. And I ended up with 14 solos, like 7 aside.
Okay.
Because one of the pieces of art I did part 1 and part 2, so it's 23 minutes aside. And we're working on the final details of just getting all the credits and the photos and everything right. And we're going to be putting the book out probably in the next couple of weeks. It'll be available. We're just talking about that today, like when we can actually offer it. So it's called The Fabric of Rhythm. It's basically like what they call a coffee table book. Mm-hmm. And it'll have, my art images, a lot of cool photos from the studio and from, different gigs that I've done, including, gigs that I did in like the 70s with big bands, and you can see my grip from 1974 and stuff like that. And a vinyl LP with 14 solo drum pieces that are, each one is literally a composition focused on representing a certain piece of art. It was a very creative endeavor, really, to come up with with music, with keeping art and music in mind together and trying to make them work together. But it was super fun, and
I've seen some of the images online too. It's really cool. It's very colorful, and you see it's almost you see the grip, the effect of your of your technique through light.
Because you're seeing the space in between the notes. Yes. You actually are seeing the space in between the notes because you can follow the pathways that the stick is making through space. So it's a cool concept. I was really happy to do that. And they're going to make 250 copies of this book in LP, and they'll all be signed and numbered. So
I love it.
So check it out.
I love it when people are thinking about pictures of themselves in 1974, and they're thinking, "Oh my gosh, look at my hair! Look at that shirt I was wearing." You're like, "Look at my grip."
Well, I had hair.
I know, but that's your concern. Look at that grip is so 1974, man. What's wrong with me?
And I'm sitting super low, like my hips definitely below my knees. I was like sitting 12 inches off the ground or something. It's pretty funny.
That's great.
So, and I had a Fibes kit.
Oh, wow.
I forgot I had a Fibes kit back then, but I had a little, like a jazz kit, but made, the Fibes kit.
Yeah. I think they're our sponsor this next month. No, I'm kidding. It's not. It's going to be. It's actually going to be summer.
But actually, next year, check it out, next year will be the 40th anniversary of me playing Sonor drum. So we have a 40th anniversary snare drum coming out that we introduced at the NAMM show. So I've been, just super happy being with them all this time. Great company, great drums. They've been super supportive to me.
And it's funny, we don't dive into a lot of gear talk on this. It's people really like life stories and things that our vocation brings that's unique. But with KHS, they're like, you got to check out these the new vintage series. And
I love, that's a great kit.
They sound and look amazing. They're really cool. Really cool. But Steve, I'm going to let you go, man. I again, happy holidays. It's a busy week, and I'm excited to share this. And I think I'm going to have it out a few days before the tribute, so everyone can get revved up and know more about you, and then we can really dive in and just and have a Steve Smith week, if you will.
All right, Matthew. Sounds good. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be in your webcast. That's very cool, and I look forward to seeing you the next time I'm down in Nashville.
Yeah. Well, I'll send you. I'll keep in touch and let you know when it's. Yeah. I think on the 7th, December 7th is when I want to get this episode. And it's an audio podcast, and Ed Toth has been a guest on here as well. If you're ever interested in hearing his actually 2-hour talk that we ended up doing, that was after whittling it down and editing. It was probably the longest I've ever had. But anyways, Steve, thanks again. Have a great night, and I'll be in touch.
Sounds good. All right, Matthew.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So there it is. There was Steve Smith. As you can tell, super nice, super easy to talk to, and I hope I get a chance to hang and talk with Steve again sometime. I'm just a huge fan, probably more so now. And like I said, this is the week of Steve Smith. I've got his book I'm digging into. Hopefully you're digging into this podcast. And then if you're close to Nashville or you're in Nashville and you can come to the Nashville Drummers Jam, that would be a good way to spend a week. So again, my thanks to David Parks from the Nashville Drummer Jam for connecting me with Steve. That was super awesome, and I appreciate him so much for doing that. Also, my appreciation goes to Mike Jackson for his technical help and cleaning up some of this interview to make it easy to listen to. Tune in next week for Zach Albetta's interview with another great drummer. If you can, take some time, just less than a minute, to go to our website, and you'll see the survey pop up. Just 10 quick questions, and you'll be entered into a contest to get some heads from our friends at Aquarian. So again, appreciate your support, and I hope to see you around. Bye-bye.